cover CU South and the process for CU South analysis. If you're here for any of the other property requests or land use requests, those will be in the open house out in the main area there. So if you'd like to extract yourself, if you're here for other things, then now's a good time to do that. What we're going to do is just go through a relatively brief presentation. We've got a number of us here from the city and some consulting representation who can help answer questions. We will have a time at the end for some questions and answers. Given that this is in the early stages of this project, we will have at least one more meeting this fall on this topic, probably a tour to the site, probably some other opportunities to be involved. So if you feel like you want more time and you have more comments, there will be other opportunities for that. So some of the folks in the room, and I'll just have them quickly raise hands, but I'm Leslie Ellis with the City of Boulder. Susan Richstone will be joining us shortly. Kurt Bauer is here from Flood Utilities. It's actually something...
Public Works, Flood and Greenways.
There we go. Don D'Amico and Mark Gershman are both here from Open Space if you have questions of that nature. We have a couple folks from University of Colorado. Francis Draper and Jeff are somewhere in the back of the room also. And then Claudia Brown is here also from Biohabitats. Fox Tuttle, Bill Fox is not present today, but he'll be present at future discussions about some of the analysis that's happening. So that's some of the folks, and if you would like to send us emails about this, you can send it, there's a link on the comprehensive plan webpage or on the CU South webpage. That's another great way to send comments or ideas about the project as it moves forward. So the reason we're here tonight is because this particular property and the analysis to look at changes to land use designation is part of the comprehensive plan process. And so it's we have our different tracks as part of the comprehensive plan. Some of those are happening in the room out here around public requests. And this is one that, because it's a land use change as part of the comp plan, we're looking at it simultaneously with other parts of the comp plan. And the purpose is to look at and analyze through the suitability analysis what will ultimately lead us to potential land use change designation on the property. And we'll talk about that here momentarily. So this process, this is a chart that's out on the wall and in your handout, and something that we've talked to the boards and commissions about. The first thing we're doing is looking at land use. We've done some initial analysis of the site. There's more to come still, and we'll talk about that here. But all of that analysis will potentially lead us to a place of making some recommendations for the land use change, and that would happen in early 2017. And if you don't mind, I'll answer questions at the end.
Explain why we're even involved.
I'm going to get to that, yeah. So, and then that can also help give us some sense of some of the types of agreement discussion we may want to have after the land use designation. On parallel, we're also working with Kurt and his team. They're looking at the flood mitigation piece of this, and all of these steps along the way will involve community engagement, outreach, input from the community. For any change to happen in the comp plan of this nature, it needs to go to 4 bodies, 2 at the city, 2 at the county, and so there's a lot of public engagement. So to get to the question about why are we doing this, there's some objectives that we've also included in the handout and the poster, but we are really working toward a recommendation potentially for a land use change. To do that, and part of the objectives are engaging the community, the stakeholders, the city, and so on, in this discussion about the future of the property, addressing flood safety, so building on the work that's been done that was approved in 2015, using the analysis to help this community conversation about what might be appropriate on the site, recognizing that CU would like to have the ability to plan for and eventually annex the site, but not develop the entire site, but also looking at how we can conserve sensitive areas on the site. and what's appropriate for recreation uses and so forth that we know that's really important to the community. I know I was out walking around yesterday and there were a bunch of signs on the site with some fairly inaccurate information that the city owns it, that there's housing development that's imminent and that kind of thing. So we just wanted to hopefully clarify any information that is not accurate that's out there, and I think part of our purpose tonight is to hopefully answer those sorts of questions, but there is not an imminent development proposed for the site. This is really the discussion about future land uses and longer term land uses for that site. So this is a site, it's owned by CU. They own the 308 acres in entirety. The city does not own any of this property. I think there was some confusion about that. It was formerly owned by Flatiron Gravel, sold to CU in the 1990s and 1996. Formerly farmed and grazed before that. There's quite a long-standing history going back into the 90s and the 2000s. We've had previous discussions between the city and CU and involving many of you in the room about future land uses and the future of the property. So we're well aware there's quite a deep history on that, and I'm sure there will be some comments and questions about that this evening as well. This is a property that you can see, if I can get the pointer to work. So it's located off of US 36, I'm sure you all know that, but it's in Area 2 in our comprehensive plan map, which means that it's eligible for annexation. So it's in the county, but it can be annexed to the city according to the current comprehensive plan. And it's actually been designated that since the 1970s, since the early comprehensive plan. I think there's also been had a lot of questions too about this map and the current land use designation. So this map that you see is the current comprehensive plan. These are the land use designations that have been in place since the 1970s. Again, there are current low density and medium density residential designations on the property. There's also a large part of the property that is designated as open space other. And what these land use designations mean, these are desired future land uses for the property, and that's what a comprehensive plan does. It sort of sets out the intended future land use for a property, and that's been the intended future land use for this property since the 1970s again. Open space other in this case is a little bit different than open space acquired. So around the property, the city does own open space all the way around on the east side of the property, and that is city open space. It's in the floodplain. It's also very sensitive. There are another number of ecological resources there. Open space other category, if you go back to this, it was an intended open space category, and the idea was that in the 1980s, 1970s, that this was a category that we said we would like to eventually designate this as open space or preserve it through various means. So just to clarify the difference between our acquired open space and our intended planned open space. So as we move forward, we've been looking at the other analysis of neighborhoods to the west and neighborhoods to the north, and we'll have a lot more information about adjacent uses on the property. We've done a lot of work also on the flood mitigation work, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to now, who's going to walk you through a little bit of information about work that's been done mainly in the last 5 years and how we got to a place with city approvals on the option D for the South Boulder Creek flood major drainage way plan. So,
can you help cue
yep, let me get you set up. There's that.
So, can everyone hear me without a microphone? Because I'll be wanting to head up here. Can you hear me in the back?
Not really.
Okay. Can I first see a show of hands of how many folks in here have been following the flood mitigation plan as started in 2010? Okay, fair amount. So I'm here, been asked to present for those of you who haven't been involved, and for those who want a recap here of the brief history of the project, including the planning process, started in 2010. Does this work better? Okay.
Yeah, we tried to tell you that earlier.
Sorry.
You went ahead anyway.
Couldn't hear over my voice. So I'll be providing a summary of the background and history, including the planning process. a summary of the study recommendations, which were accepted by council about a year ago in 2015. I'll be focusing a little bit on why we're probably all here, which is the phase 1 of the 3 phases of the recommendation, which is picture a big bathtub, a regional stormwater detention facility onto Campus South by Table Mesa and US 36. And then I will wrap up by talking about next steps, mostly from the engineering side. This is a parallel path. So to orient you, most of my figures, north is to the right. So this is the main channel of South Boulder Creek. This is US 36, South Boulder Road, Arapahoe, 55th, and cuts through the middle here. The light blue shows the limits of the existing FEMA 100-year floodplain. There are currently over 500 structures and over 1,800 dwelling units in the 100-year floodplain. So these yellow arrows show you how this flooding occurs right now. South Boulder Creek, the channel is actually not very big, and in a larger storm event, it starts overtopping, even up past 93. The land tips to the north and west, so it starts spilling out, wants to go here, hits the certified CU Campus South levee, comes around, wraps up, and ponds down here at Table Mesa and 36. When that pond gets deep enough, like it did in the 1960s and again in 2013, it overtops US 36 and floods extensively through the city. So in 2013, the overall damages in South Boulder Creek were some of the highest in the city's 15 drainageways. 2 figures on the left show images of Koala Drive, where the flood depths were over 4 feet. And then on the right, upper right, shows the post-flood of Fraser Manor here. Their underground parking flooded in the first floor, and luckily no one died, but 120 cars floated in there. So we actually started this flood mitigation study in 2010 in conjunction or cooperation with the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. Study extents are shown in red here and extends from approximately Highway 93 all the way north to Arapahoe. And the purpose of the study was we were tasked with looking at alternatives. We looked at over 30 initially for ways to mitigate flooding in what we call the West Valley, which is shown within this yellow oval, which is bounded approximately by US 36, Arapahoe, and then 55th runs through the middle of it. So in 2014, a draft recommended plan was prepared and presented to the public, Open Space Board of Trustees, the Water Resources Advisory Board, and City Council at one of their study sessions. The recommended plan had 3 phases. So the first phase, and what we'll be talking about tonight, is the proposed regional retention, pictures the bathtub by US 36 and Table Mesa. Second phase would be improvements in the West Valley. And then the third phase would be proposed detention on Flatirons Golf Course. So in 2014, the boards and council all concurred to move forward and approve phases 2 and 3. But they said, well, wait a second, your current in 2014 alternative would have too many impacts on open space mountain park lands. There's critical habitat for prebbles along the creek here. There's Euclid's truss, there's leopard frogs, there's a lot of very high value environmental resources here. You can talk to Don et al. Afterwards about all of those. So they said, go back and look at some more alternatives. And some of the public said, could you also consider looking at pushing some of the storage or the water further south on the campus site? So Following 2014, we went back, this is what we presented in 2014. So we presented in 2014, you can see the berm back then was outside of CDOT right away. Back then, CDOT said no. So this was before the flood. So this would have caused a lot of impacts to resources here. So they said, can you try to eliminate those impacts by using more of CU South land? So following 2014, we went back with a consultant team and came up with 6 more alternatives and ran through this 2-dimensional hydraulic model and came up with a combination of 6 more alternatives. So the total of 7, there are 4 single berm options, so just 1 continuous berm, but with varying degrees of fill and excavation. And then there were 3 developed to look at ways to push the storage of floodwaters further south on campus. That would require 2 berms at least, because some of the water will always come down and hit Table Mesa down there at the end. So in evaluating these options, the option that really stood out was option D, and we presented this to the public, boards, and council. Under this alternative, what we did was get CDOT post-flood to agree in concept to use their right-of-way. So out there, if you're familiar with the new multi-use path, that would go on top of the berm now. So it would eliminate the potential for permanent impacts to open space and mountain parklands. The rest of it stayed fairly similar to what we proposed in 2014. So we presented this last year, and we presented this last year to the boards and council. Council accepted this plan in August of 2015.
I think it was 2014, wasn't it?
2014 was the first round, then we went through all these, and then in 2015, we presented this and it was
You're right.
accepted by
Excuse me,
council
Kurt.
here.
Excuse me.
So this figure shows in concept a rendering of what this alternative would look like if you were hovering above as a bird or a drone. Here's the RTD park and ride, looking south and west, Flatiron to be over here. This is the existing pond. So it's proposed right now that the levee or the new berm, which you can't really see, would start here with the new path on top. Would extend around here to capture the floodwaters like a bathtub and tie in back here. This shows you the existing pond, the existing tennis courts. What you can hardly see here is the existing CU levee, which is certified by FEMA right through here. It should be noted that this is number 16 of the public meetings, including board and council, for this project. So, a summary of the next steps here. We're currently working on parallel paths, as Leslie mentioned. She's heading up the planning effort to see if we can come to agreement with the public and CU to use their land. And then I'm heading up the engineering side. So we have selected a new design team to conduct preliminary design if this moves forward. This would need to go through the state engineer's office. So we've selected a team that does that kind of work exclusively, along with a bunch of sub-consultants there. We're currently negotiating a scope of work with them, and we anticipate getting them under contract in October. Now, we can't get too far ahead. We can do some stuff, but we can't get too far ahead of this planning process. This is a parallel process. We do have money still programmed in for bonding in 2018. We estimate this alternative would cost about $22 million. And we do have money in 2018, although again, that's contingent on moving, if this moves forward, on a new agreement and the stipulations that could change this alternative. So we believe this would take about 2 years to construct if this moves forward.
All right, thanks, Kurt. So because this is happening in parallel, we wanted to make sure that everybody understood the parallel process and the importance of that. And I'm going to flip back now so that we can cover a little bit more of where we are on the land use side of analysis. If I can get my slide to work. Okay, so some of you have seen, oh, there we go. So some of you have seen copies of the initial reports. We have some here for display, and they're also available on the project webpage. We have some initial analysis that we've done on the environmental factors, on views, on adjacent properties, and we're still pulling together other pieces of information. We know a lot of you in the room will have ideas about things that you'd like to consider or be looked at through this process, so be assured we're still in the early stages of doing that work, but we do have some initial findings that we'd like to share with you tonight. So these are the kinds of things we're looking at on the left side, the ownership, the history, views, and so on. What we still need to do work on is looking forward in terms of utilities, potential utility uses, impacts, transportation, congestion, level of service, and those kinds of aspects of transportation. We've done some initial transportation. So our initial findings, we just want to share. I'm going to hand the microphone over to Claudia, who can share with you what's in the Biohabitats report.
Hi. So Biohabitats is an ecological consulting firm and a conservation planning firm, and that is really all we've been doing for 30 years. And we've worked for the city for 20 years now, doing wetland mapping, ecological restoration, and a lot of park maintenance, biological assessments, things like that. So we were really excited about this project, and happy to work with the city again. And our job was to collect all the available data on natural resources and go out to the site and do our own mapping of plant communities, and then also work with OSMP and gather some additional habitat information. And so we looked at plants, especially native plants, wildlife, water, and then we also looked at some of the physical features, the geology and hydrogeology. And we took, for each layer then, we broke it up into tiny grids. And each of the cells in the grid would get a 1 if a feature was present, like a wetland, or a 0 if something wasn't present. So we're trying to quantify these different characteristics and kind of begin to see patterns. So for each layer, it was given a value of presence or absence of a natural resource feature. And then all those layers were stacked on top of each other, and the sum total of all the values in one cell was added together. So if you had a wetland and you had Preble's habitat and you had Euclides tress habitat, you'd have a higher value than something that didn't have any of those features. Oh, where's the sample? Oh, sorry, thank you. So when we put all those back together and stacked them on top of each other, we got this preliminary conservation suitability map. And what this shows is that where you have darker colors, you have more of those values present, and the lighter values, you have less of those conservation characteristics present. And so you begin to see some patterns here where the south part of the site, where the wetlands are present, and the eastern boundary and around the ponds, they're all the darker colors because they're associated with either amphibian habitat or prebbles or wetlands or native plants. And this is the beginning of the patterns we begin to see. We did not include in this analysis things like restoration suitability or mitigation, wetland mitigation opportunities. That's something that might be we want to add into later. But we did want to begin to look at other things that maybe weren't so easily quantified on a map, like views and connectivity to the surrounding space. And so on the left, you can see how, it's a little hard to see, I'm sorry, but what we did was we took all OSMP's data on the plant communities that they're mapping and all the habitat values that they are tracking on the along South Boulder Creek, and then we just conceptually tried to emphasize with the arrows where there was opportunity between the two sites for animals and plants, seeds to cross across boundaries and show some connectivity potential along waterways and things like that. So it's just a conceptual approach to highlight the importance of connectivity to the surrounding area. And then on the right, we really wanted to begin to think about the value of the views. So what we did is we took a bunch of photo points at each stop along the way, and then we used the Forest Service guidelines on valuing views. So like if you have a open view of mountains with nothing blocking it, that gets a higher score. And if you have like a rural feel or a view of water, those things all are known to have give a sense of well-being and have higher values. So this is just the beginning of showing parts of the site where you get more views and that are in those categories. And again, it's just conceptual to begin to think about where are parts of the site where you wouldn't want to have a view blocked, or you might want to look more carefully.
We're actually just closing in on the last couple slides here, and then we'll do questions if you don't mind just holding that for just a moment. Yes.
I think you guys had enough time, that means you are owed some time.
Yes, we are almost done here, so we just want to share a couple more pieces that we're working on. We are doing more work around the landscape characters and view sheds, as Claudia mentioned. We're also mapping and charting trails and recreation use, informal trails that are on the property. There's, as I mentioned, some initial transportation analysis that looks at access to the property, and there's more yet to come on that to look at the level of service and other issues accessing the property. And then as far as next steps, so we've got a ways to go on this. This is early days of starting a process with the community and discussions. There are going to be some upcoming discussions with boards, with Planning Board and Open Space Board, probably again in the fall. We're looking at scheduling an event in November. That would be another opportunity to have further input from the community, because we heard that this was not the most convenient night with the debate happening. We want to make sure we provide ample opportunities. And then a study session we're leading toward in January of 2017. The study session is an opportunity for Planning Board and Council to talk together about initial ideas or recommendations. They don't make decisions then, so a decision of any sort on a land use change would follow that sometime in 2017. So that's where we're headed in terms of the project and the next steps, and there is information that's on that project webpage there. So with that, we would like to, for those of you who would like to stay, who have questions, who would like more information, please do so. For those of you who've had enough and don't want to stay, please feel free to mosey on to your next destination. We'll answer questions for you. There are other ways that you can leave comments. There are comment cards here today. You can send emails, you can go to the web page, so if you'd like to share other comments or ideas. We're not well equipped here to take extensive notes and comments, so I would highly recommend that your comments be in a written format, and we'll answer questions in this format. So actually we'll do questions up here. So let's see. If you could hold it, that'd be great. So I think we'll try to go in an orderly fashion as we see your hands go up, and if you could ask your question, and we'll find the appropriate member of staff or consultant to answer it.
Thank you. I have a point of information and then a couple of questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My point of information is that in 1972, the City Greenbelt Committee unanimously resolved that since this general area provides an entryway to the city, its general character should be that of open space. Later in the year, it accepted mining of the entire site, provided, quote, the land remains open space at virtually no cost to the public after the mining is completed. And then I have questions. Is a Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan land use designation change required in order that the berms and the flood control measures be enacted? And related to that, the same beginning of the question, how a Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan land use designation change would relate to possible annexation.
So I think we'll answer. Yeah. Oh, good point.
Is this on already? Or
Yes.
Okay.
So, good evening. My name, first of all, is Susan Richmond. I'm the Deputy Director for Planning. So I think I'll answer your last question first. So, this property, as Leslie said, is located in what we call Area 2. It's an area currently in the county that is within the area that the city may consider annexation. And it's been mapped that way going back to well before CU bought it back into the late 1970s. The land use designations on the comprehensive plan are intended to be this the community's future desired land uses for a site, and they guide the zoning that is established on the site at the time of annexation. So the land use designations in the comprehensive plan provide the guidance for the actual zoning that is then established at the time of annexation and initial zoning. So I think that answers your last question. Could you repeat your question just before that? I'm sorry.
Sure. Is the comprehensive land use designation change required and necessary in order that the flood control measures be built?
That's,
I can't hear that in the back.
so the question was whether the land use designation change is necessary in order for the flood control measures to be implemented. Those are not, there is a potential interrelationship, but one is not directly dependent on the other.
What is the potential interrelationship? That CU won't let you do it unless they.
The University of Colorado owns the property. They, the city would like to put certain flood control measures on property that they own. They have been in discussions with the city for many years about potential annexation of the property. It's in the city's designated annexation. So the concept is that all of these issues would be discussed in tandem. So yes, I guess CU has certain expectations that they will be able to annex and develop portions of the property. Exactly which portions of the property and how that all plays out is sort of the process we're starting now. In terms of the issue of what the right land use is and then what the right conditions are as part of annexation. Annexation is generally, not always, but generally a consensual contractual agreement between a property owner and the city.
My question,
Wait, we're gonna go,
Well,
do you have the,
she has the mic, I think.
she has the mic.
She was the first one to raise her hand.
could you throw up a picture of the property, probably the one that you were using or the one for the flood control? Go for it. That one.
This one?
That's
Or
one.
the flood, well, the flood one is that one.
So I have to go back to the one that the biohabitat person was using. Yeah, that one. Now, looking at that property, I guess I have a couple, I'm sort of trying to get the conceptual into something more that I can understand. With the berm, with the flood mitigation, in a flood situation, how much of that property would flood after you've done your mitigation?
So that would have to go back to the one just before. And it's shown conceptually in blue,
This one here.
but the limits of ponding in the 100-year FEMA design storm would be in blue here. But that includes excavation here and fill here. So that is fungible, and that is why we're doing this in tandem. We can't get too far ahead if we move ahead to see what the agreement, how that dictates where things are inundated.
Okay. Then you also talked about the biohabitats. You only talked about plants and the prevalent. Thank God for the prevalent. Anyway, what I'm wondering is, have you taken into consideration the foxes or the coyotes and the the moose and our deer.
Yeah, I only mentioned that because we were just moving quickly. We looked at amphibians, reptiles, we looked at small breeding birds, grassland breeding birds. We looked at a lot of other things. The only things I mentioned were things that had mapped locations, and then one of the things we did was we looked at the surrogates of the habitat types they like, so aquatic habitat or wetland habitat or native grassland habitat. So they are embedded in the plant communities, but we also looked at known habitat locations as well.
Is there any plan to do away with any of the wetlands?
Well, if you look at the wetland map that's shown, there are wetlands that are in some of those areas. So there are wetlands that are in some of the areas that are targeted for excavation and fill. And so one of the things that would be needed would be mitigation to offset if there was an impact from the flood project or any project.
Yeah, that's a good question.
We're not that far yet.
So we're gonna move on and let some other folks have a chance to ask some questions as well. Thank you.
Could you go back to one of your sheets where you, let's see. One of your things, Leslie, where you talked about, it was phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Back the other way. The other
No?
one.
Are you talking about the chart this?
No, right there.
No.
Right there. Where's it? Okay, no, that isn't the one. Try going back.
Maybe if you ask your question, then we can figure out which
Well,
slide.
I'm wondering if there's no imminent plan to build. On one of your little slides, it was water and utilities. And if there's no plan to build, but just do flood control, why is there talk about utilities and water? That's my first question. In other words, what I'm saying is, I think no imminent plan to build is like, you talking 5 years? 6
Right.
months?
Right, when I say no imminent plan, I mean there's nothing specific proposed right now that CU has proposed for that property. However, they have expressed interest in long-term planning for the site and potentially using that site for recreation as it is currently with the tennis courts and so forth. Or at some point in time, we've heard public discussion of some type of housing potentially for faculty housing or something like that.
The city
Now,
has no
utilities,
plan to
the
build.
city does not own any of this property. The city has no plan to build housing, as some of the signs that were posted on the site indicated. That's not accurate
And
information.
if the city were to annex the property, it still would not want to build.
The city would not be in the lead of any development on this property ever. The only thing we're working with CU on to negotiate is the site of the berm, and that's something that we would.
One other
Yes,
question,
sure.
if you don't mind. I heard someone talk about after the October 20th planning board discussion, there was to be an open meeting for public input. It's not listed here. Is that another rumor, or is that the truth? There's a public input meeting.
There will be a public input meeting. We have yet to schedule the date. We're going to look very carefully at calendars and find a date that doesn't conflict with other events, and then we'll publicize that date.
I'd like to just add on to make sure we give you a clear answer about the issue of why doesn't there talk about utilities and service analysis. When we annex property, we need to look at how that property can be served with city services. That's the time that we negotiate all those arrangements, so it's really important that the appropriate studies be done so that any of the terms and conditions of annexation are in an agreement when the property's annexed. So that's, if you saw that phase 2 includes analyzing utilities and service analysis, it would look at how the site would be accessed from a transportation perspective, how it could be served by utilities, et cetera. So
But the city doesn't want to annex it.
the city, it is in the annexation area. CU is interested in annexing the property. So the idea is after the comprehensive plan and any land use designations are completed that provide guidance on the appropriate future land uses, there would be discussions about the various issues that would form an agreement, either separate from or as part of an annexation agreement. And yes, the University of Colorado is interested in annexing the property, and they've been talking with us about that for a long time.
Can you explain what annex means? The way
Yeah.
you're using
So
it?
annex means have it become part of the city. Today it is an unincorporated Boulder County. It is within the area that we call Area 2, the city's service area, where annexation to the city may be considered. And it's been designated that since back in the 70s.
Does that mean a transfer of ownership? Or
No.
just a change?
No, it's a transfer of jurisdiction. It would no longer, ownership does not change. It could be sold at some point by the owner, but it would change jurisdiction. It would no longer be an unincorporated Boulder County. It would be part of the city, within the city boundaries.
Area 1?
Okay, so-
Area 1.
Wait,
Whoa, let's go.
I have a mic.
Hold on. You can get the mic.
Do people understand then what annexation means? It means to have it come into the city, be part of the city of Boulder.
Wait a minute, you guys, there's an order to this, we're raising our hands, the mic's gonna go around. I raise my hand, I have the mic. Okay, so according to 1972, there's supposed to be an open view when you come into the city, regardless of who owns the land. Am I correct in that assumption? So as CU owns the
So
land.
I just have to say one thing. I am not familiar with those documents or what that does or what agreements are there. Or, I don't know what those specific representations were. The only official things at this point I know of are some of the things that are in the comprehensive plan. So I don't know that those are somehow enshrined commitments of any sort.
Okay, can we find that out before the
Yeah,
next public?
we'd be happy to find that
meeting?
out and to take the information and understand it better.
So my understanding right now, CU can't build on this unless it gets approval, or can it do whatever it wants on this?
That's actually not as simple as you might think. So, the city needs to agree to annex, and then to have it be part of the city and developed within city limits. The University of Colorado, actually as a state entity, it isn't subject to the same zoning requirements as a private landowner. So I'm not saying they would do this, and they have expressed over and over again their desire to annex to the city and get city water and sewer. But they actually do have the ability to do certain things. It gets very complex because there's state laws and other things, but it isn't 100% off the table that if they were not to annex the city to the city that they could not do any development.
Unless that is somehow binding at 1972.
Yeah, I don't know what that study, yeah.
Thank you. I have a question first about the floodplain piece of the project and then the land use change. With respect to the area that's subject to the project that would excavate and fill on the property, could you clarify your procedural obligations under what might be a 1041 area of special interest, statewide interest, your U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Clean Water Act permit, whether you're going nationwide 37 or individual permit, and if individual permit, do you have obligations under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA? That's the first question.
So I'll try and take a stab at that. So any project that we do in utilities requires permits just like any private project. So we would need to secure all necessary wetland and floodplain permits. In addition, this project would need to go through the state engineer's office because it would be categorized as a high hazard dam. And with that, we would, before anything occurred further in design, we would submit to Urban Drainage and Flood Control District and FEMA what's called a conditional letter of map revision. It's a fancy term for what we think the post-project floodplain would look like. So they either concur or come back with comments. And once that is approved, then we're comfortable moving ahead with design. Then post-project, we would submit what's called a letter of map revision, like we're doing on Wonderland Creek, that project that's going on right now. So we would need to secure all necessary permits, probably individual, probably not nationwide, depending on the impacts. We have to figure that out. Certainly a wetlands and floodplain development permit, and then through FEMA, and then an additional layer on this one is State Engineer's Office.
Okay, the US 36 project was an individual permit that did require an EIS. So do you have any obligation here to do an individual permit?
We would, depending on the impacts, the Corps of Engineers and Fish and Wildlife Service would dictate whether it was nationwide or individual, probably individual. But that's part of why Council accepted this concept, was to use US 36 corridor, which has been, they mitigated for impacts. So we would be using that mitigated land and putting the path on top of the berm.
Okay, I think many people in this crowd would be interested in your obligations in relation to site restoration that would follow from those things which you have not yet made clear. You could make that clear now or later. I don't want to hog the microphone. The other question has to do with, if you make land use changes to the CU South property, it is not entirely clear to me, having listened to you, what is allowable without any change to land uses, land use designations, versus what would be allowable with the proposed land use changes? Is it something like 938 dwelling units at various densities in the future scenario versus what? Thank you.
So, right, do you want to put the land use map back up, Leslie? Right now, the land use map shows low-density residential development, the southwestern side of the site, and medium-density residential up on the top. I don't have at my fingertips what that would mean in terms of amount of development you could occur. I mean, we have that, I just don't have it at my fingertips right now. Going back 15 years or more, it was acknowledged that the way the colors on this map are today do not make sense for a variety of reasons. And councils on 2 different previous comprehensive plan updates gave direction, the planning board and the council, that once the flood mitigation was figured out, that we would come back to look at them. So there has been a record over quite a few years saying this doesn't quite make sense. And therefore, it had also been recommended that when we come back to this, which what we're doing now, that we first study the property to determine what is appropriate in terms of where development should occur. So that's the point of the whole site suitability analysis, is to identify the sensitive parts of the site so that we could look at this. In terms of how much could be developed, we have not even analyzed what's appropriate yet in terms of where, this is basic information we've just gotten, and now we need to look at what might make sense in terms of where on the property development would make sense. So that's still to be determined.
Medium density is 14 homes per acre.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, up to 14 DUs per acre, low-density residential is up to 6. Understand, CU owns the property now. In general, they're not looking at this for a football stadium or something, it's really, they understand that only certain uses will make sense here, but it is a different type of entity than just probably doing low-density residential housing or whatever.
I just have a couple of questions. One of them has to do with the fill, the flood mitigation option D. And I was wondering, why do you have to put the fill there? I mean, what is the purpose of the fill?
It's a great question, thank you. That was just based on initial conversations with the university so that we could minimize the amount of land on CU South that would flood in a 100-year event. So if you picture a bathtub, we have to make a certain volume of water for the bathtub. To do that, you can do that by letting it spill all over, or you can dig it down and place fill around it to make the bathtub rim. So it's just conceptual. Like I said, this is why we need to wait on the engineering to see how, if this moves forward, this changes. It affects the size of burn locations, that kind of stuff. So it was conceptual based on conversations with the university on a conceptual level.
Okay, just to clarify then, the fill is, if the fill was not there, the bathtub would be bigger.
Correct.
Thank you.
In extent, not volume, but yes.
2 questions. Second question is, has to do with providing utilities to CU South. Does the city have any power or resources in limiting or deciding how much of sewer and electricity, water they want to provide to CU South? Or once the door is open, is CU able to just demand or ask for as much as they would like?
So those are the types of things we look at as part of an annexation agreement or a separate agreement with CU. It depends on, first of all, us looking at our capacity to serve and our ability to serve. And then we would look at capacity issues. Just as an example, when the East Campus was annexed, there were certain overall limits put before certain improvements had to occur to transportation. So that's all to be determined, and that's why before we annex, we would expect certain studies to be done so that we address those issues as part of an agreement.
I have a question, and if you could raise your hand, not if you want this mic, but who was involved in the flood that had their house damaged? I mean, water in the basement. Okay, that's a good, that makes me feel better, because I'm hearing a lot of concerns, and I agree with how the property is going to be used, but it's not open space. And I've been through meetings for the past 3 years, and listening to the process, what it's going to take to try to fix the problem. And the problem is, when we bought our house, it was not in a floodplain. And after we owned it, then it became in a floodplain, and rightfully so, because it flooded, floor to ceiling. And I'm really glad to see that we progressed this far, but I just get concerned. I don't want to see it hung up where somebody's overly zealous and doesn't really see. To me, the real problem is public health and safety. I just want to get it fixed so we can not, I'm worried that we'll have fatalities if this happens again, what happened 3 years ago. And this would remedy that with that berm. Now, I don't want to see a stadium there. I don't want to see high rises there. It is their land. I think if they own it and they want to build on it, hopefully there's some negotiation that happens that you can minimize the density and make sure the use is not goes to like a stadium or things like that. That's just a comment.
Thank you.
Hi, my name, I've actually been sitting here listening. It's been really interesting hearing both sides. I guess I want to speak a little bit on the other side. My name is Nicole Keneally, and I'm the women's head coach at the University of Colorado. I am entering my 18th year as the head coach at CU, and for the first... Tennis. Yep. First 8 years, our courts were at Kittredge, and then we moved to the CU South campus. Regularly, it is obviously known as being one of the best facilities, most prettiest facilities in the country. But as I'm sure all of the ladies that are in the room, at some time you were a daughter, now you may be a mother. All the gentlemen in the room, you guys are sons, but you're maybe also now fathers of daughters. And for the last 10 years, since we've been at the CU South facility, many times I have 17, 18, 19 campers, so people, kids as young as 8, 9, using porta potties. Okay, so my motivation, because I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make another meeting or not, was just to get across what this would do for our women's tennis program, our athletic department, but also the City of Boulder. The City of Boulder has a very rich tennis community with many, many people who play and use that facility. And if we had the opportunity not to build high-rises, and I obviously don't know what the university also has in plan, but if we had the opportunity to build an indoor tennis facility on that site, we would have an opportunity to also engage the community in a public-private endeavor to allow more opportunities for our community. So it's important, it's fun.
So I'm going to actually ask that we take only one or two more questions because we did commit to folks that we're going to let everybody get home for the debates, number one. I'm going to ask that they be questions and not advocacy for certain positions at this point in time. And then there both is an opportunity to get additional info in the open house, to write down your comments. And as we said, this is the beginning of a process. There's going to be quite a few more opportunities for folks to provide input and weigh in as we have more. I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to take one in the back there. So Ruth, did you want to?
Thanks. Yeah, I want to know what is the final date that you're voting on the annexation to go into this updated Boulder Valley Comp Plan? Because with all the moving parts and issues that we have, and the fact that in the documents I read, CU has, they keep saying, well, we don't know what we're going to build. I mean, you might not do anything for 5 years. We don't know what it is. I think then they should just wait for 5 or 10 years to apply for annexation while we, as a community, discuss all the issues that are out here. We get a final plan from CU as to what they want to do so that the entire community can look over that plan. I have been involved in these issues for a while. I was at the meeting in '79 when the mining company said, please put up with our noise and dust for 25 years and you'll have a beautiful wetlands. And that disappeared. And then I was part of the whole issue trying to stop CU from buying the land. We couldn't get the city to do it. But CU had very sneaky plans. They paid Jim Fort $10,000 to outsmart the city. I mean, there was all kinds of shenanigans going on. So they bought this land. We informed them about the land, and FEMA didn't even know that it was a man-made berm. So they bought this pig in the poke, and now they're trying to look to us to try to put the lipstick back on it, I guess. But so I say, if you don't know what you're doing, we want to see a plan, and if we don't see a plan, no annexation this year.
Just wait. Why can't we wait 5 years?
Yeah, I want to say thanks for clarifying some of the misinformation that's been out there. And my question was related to something else that's been out there, which is that this idea, and I think for some people the sticking point seems to be with why the city seems to be agreeing to bring water and electricity there, and that some of the information that I've heard is that from CU facilities employees is that maybe this is a quid pro quo for the city, or for CU providing some of the property for the hotels that the city's planning on building, the convention center, that, are there agreements between CU and the city in terms of CU is agreeing to provide some help with the properties where these hotels are going, where the convention center is going, and that therefore the CU is hoping to get this assistance from the city of bringing water and electricity?
Absolutely not. There have not been any behind-the-scenes negotiations with CU relating to this property in the recent, as of, I don't know what happened in the past, but in terms of related to the comp plan and the flood, absolutely not. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. I think we have a handout in the other room that gives you the website where you can stay updated, and as Leslie has said, this is the beginning of taking a look and analyzing the property, and please leave us your comments.
Leslie, what